I think the strongest argument I've ever heard against the existence of God was on this topic. It was on this topic of pain and suffering. It's if there is a loving, all-knowing, all-powerful God, why doesn't he do something about pain and suffering? Have you asked a question like that before? Or is someone you know asking a question just like this? For the atheist, they would respond to this, say that the God of the Bible can't exist because if there's pain and suffering, well, that must mean he's not a loving God. Because why would a loving God allow pain and suffering? Or they would allow, maybe he's loving, but he's not powerful enough to do something about it. He just can't help. Or maybe they would say he is both loving and powerful, but he just doesn't know about your pain. He's distant, a God who's not involved, not around, not there. And that's why there's pain and suffering. Or lastly, they would suggest he doesn't exist at all. These are things that people wonder. These are things that people are not sure about. How can we make sense of pain and suffering and the existence of the God of the Bible? Well, we have lots of answers, and Jesus has them too, so I want to share that with you today. The most common answer to this question that people give up is not satisfying. The common answer is, you deserve it. You did something bad and you're being punished. In the book of Job, we read about this. 30 chapters of the book is devoted to an argument over this exact topic. Does Job deserve it? Do we deserve it? You see, Job was a righteous man, and he followed God, and yet he lost his business, he lost his children, he lost his property, he lost his health, and reduced to nothing, his friends said, dude, you deserve it. Zophar, one of his pretty lame friends, said, God is doubtless punishing you far less than you deserve. He's the rudest of the three, if you go and read it. He has no filter. You probably know someone like that too in your life. But he assumed, if you're being punished, it must be because you did something to deserve it. And Jesus' disciples came to the same exact conclusion. When they saw a man who was blind from birth, they said, why was this man born blind? They're asking Jesus this question. Was it because of his own sins or his parents' sins? Like, they only saw two options. His sins or his parents. There's got to be one of them because he's being punished, right? That's how we respond to pain and suffering. Think, you deserve it. But what is Jesus' answer? His answer is going to set the foundation for us today as we explore the reason for pain and suffering. It was not because of his sins or his parents' sins, Jesus answered. You guys are way off track. You got it wrong. He said, this happened so the power of God could be seen in him. The power of God could be seen in his pain and suffering. Perhaps there's something bigger going on in pain and suffering than what we see. Perhaps there's a greater purpose where God is on display through weakness. Today, we're going to find ourselves in Mark chapter 5, and we're going to explore the lives of 4 different sufferers who are each found in this passage. If you have a Bible, go ahead and open there to Mark chapter 5. If you don't have one, there's a Bible just like this at the seat in front of you. You can take it and turn to page 805 there, and that's where we're going to be sitting down. But before we jump into this, I want to ask you, do you remember where Jesus was in our message last week? Does anyone remember what was happening? I think I hear the storm on the sea where Jesus was asleep in the boat. Do you remember that? He woke up, his disciples felt like, do you not even care? And we found out that Jesus was the captain, not just of the boat, but of all of nature too. And he has power. But you wonder, what was he doing in that boat? He was crossing, but where was he going? Well, that's where chapter 5 picks up. We find that he went across to the Gerasenes. Now, the Gerasenes was a place where the Gentiles lived. The Jews would say that they were the unclean Gentiles, would live over at that side of the lake. In this particular area, they were shepherds, but not of sheep like you'd expect, of unclean pigs. And they shepherd pigs. And there was a man who lived there in the unclean burial caves. And inside of him was an unclean spirit. Actually, more than one, a legion of unclean spirits inside of him. I don't know if you've picked up on a theme here of this place. The unclean Gentiles with unclean pigs and an unclean burial site with unclean spirits. This was an unclean man. This is not the place that Jews would go. These are not the people that Jews would be around. Yet Jesus made a decision to cross the sea to be where this man was. And when Jesus came there, he ran out of the hills and came before him. And it's a powerful story. We don't have time to read the whole thing today, but Jesus cast out that legion of demons from him, and his suffering that had been going on for a long time ended. He fell at Jesus' feet. He wanted to follow him, and Jesus said, I'm going to send you back to the Gentiles, to the Decapolis, or the 10 cities, and you're going to be an evangelist for me. Tell everyone what I've done for you. And we see that principle that Jesus shared with his disciples at play in his life. Because of his suffering, he then showed the power of God, and the glory of God is to all of the Gentiles. And this is where we're going to pick up the passage today in verse 21. Verse 21, it says, Jesus got into the boat again and went back to the other side of the lake. So I'm just going to stop there. It's like, that was it? You came across big sea, a big storm. You get here, heal this guy, and the people rejected him, and so he goes right on back. That's why he came. He came to heal this man. So when he got into the boat again and went back to the other side of the lake, where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore, then a leader of the local synagogue, whose name was Jairus, arrived. So Jairus, it says he's the leader of the local synagogue. At this point in the story, we have heard about the synagogue. It was back in chapter 3, we read a little bit about Jesus' last encounter in a synagogue. Let me just read what happened there. It said, Jesus went into the synagogue again and noticed a man with a deformed hand. Since it was the Sabbath, Jesus' enemies watched him closely. If he healed the man's hand, they planned to accuse him of working on the Sabbath. So in the synagogue, these people are plotting, they're planning, they're trying to accuse him. He heals the man, and then down in verse 6, we read, at once the Pharisees went away and met with supporters of Herod to plot how to kill Jesus. So that's his last experience in the synagogue, and here he is, a leader of the synagogue comes, and you're left wondering, is he here to just accuse Jesus for going to the unclean Gentiles, from crossing the sea and going where Jews shouldn't go? Is he here to trick him, to trap him? Is he part of this plot that we just read about to kill Jesus? What's going on here? This man is an enemy of Jesus. But as we read, that's not what he was there for. When he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet, pleading fervently with him. My little daughter is dying, he said. Please come and lay your hands on her so she can live. So Jairus is our second sufferer here. And a man of his status wouldn't fall down on his knees before a traveling rabbi. He wouldn't plead and beg unless he was humbled, unless he was desperate. His little girl was 12 years old, and she was his only daughter. I can't imagine the pain that is. My daughter just turned 13 recently, and just the thought of losing her, I can't bear that. And so it doesn't matter what his status was. It doesn't matter his position. He falls before Jesus and pleads and begs with him. Jesus, just like he didn't reject the unclean, He doesn't even reject those who are his enemies. But instead, we read that Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him, jostling. It's a very densely packed crowd, and they are going on a life and death mission to save his daughter. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal from many doctors, and over the years, she had spent everything she had to pay them. But she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. So our story of Jairus gets interrupted by this woman here, our third sufferer in the passage. And in Proverbs 13:12, it says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a dream fulfilled is a tree of life." For Jairus, his hope had been deferred. There's an interruption here, and that can make the heart sick just thinking about that. But for this woman, her hope had been deferred over and over and over again. It said that she had suffered under many doctors. She had her hopes up, and then it was crushed. And then she spent more money and had her hopes up, and it was crushed. And not only is she not getting better, she's getting worse. And it says that she spent all that she had. So her money is dwindling, and with it, her hope. Her hope deferred again and again and again. Her heart is sick, and she's broken in this situation where she is. And for her, this curse is a lifetime. It says for the Jews that anyone who's unclean needs to leave and be outside of the city gates until evening time. If they're clean, they can wash and come back. But she's unclean for 12 years. She's outside of the camp. She's ostracized. She's put to where no one else can be. And anyone or anything she touches also becomes unclean and has to go outside of the camp. And in this condition, she's not allowed to go into the temple. She's not allowed to worship there. She's not allowed to eat of the peace offering. She's not allowed to be a part of all these things. And on top of this curse, it's likely that with the bleeding condition that she had, she was unmarried and childless as well. You think of all the curses, all of the weight in her society that was put on her. Those things in that society meant a lot. And so for her, she's completely on the outside of everything. But we find her in the crowd. And you're like, what? You're not supposed to be there. All these people you're touching, you're making them unclean. Why are you doing this? Well, just like Jairus was a little bit desperate, she finds herself a little desperate as well as she comes to Jesus. Our text picks up with some very powerful words. In verse 27, it says, she had heard about Jesus. So she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe, for she thought to herself, if I just touch his robe, I will be healed. And immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. She had heard about Jesus. That's very powerful. In your suffering, in your life, have you heard about Jesus? Or are you looking to doctor after doctor after doctor and watching your money dwindle? Maybe your suffering is not physical, but it's an emotional hurt. Have you heard about Jesus? He is the Savior. He has the power. He is wanting to be there for you. Have you heard about Jesus? There is great power in his name. And for those around you who you know are suffering, have they heard about Jesus? Will they come to Jesus? Have you told them? Do they know about Jesus? It's because she heard that she came. The kingdom of God, because of Jesus, is breaking into this world. You can have real peace in the midst of your suffering, In the midst of your hurting, there is peace available. And you can be free from guilt. Even if the suffering was a result of choices you made, Jesus can set you free from that guilt that you carry and that burden that you don't have to have. And you don't need to live with a fear of death or fear of anything else, for Christ has come to set you free from those things. So in your suffering, don't look to yourself or to humans or to others. Look to God. Look to Jesus, because he is the one who can heal you. He is the one who can help.